Welcome to my channel, Brain Encoded. Today we're going to cut straight to the neural core of one of the most powerful ideas in performance and well-being, how to rewire your brain for lasting success. Not motivational fluff, but specific neuroscience, timed behaviors, and practical protocols you can apply today to build deep, durable change. Hook. Imagine learning one compact system that turns fleeting motivation into sustained momentum, a system that uses your brain's chemistry and wiring rather than fighting them. That's what we'll do. Explain the mechanisms, show the daily habits that shift the wiring, and give you a simple, repeatable plan. First, what does rewiring even mean? Your brain is not fixed. Neurons form, strengthen, and weaken connections based on experience. To get new skills, habits, or ways of thinking, you must produce targeted changes in specific circuits. That requires three ingredients: focused attention during learning, the correct reward timing strategy to stamp in change, and the recovery processes, sleep, rest, that consolidate the work. This is not abstract. It's how learning and habit formation occur at the cellular and circuit level. The human brain is not a static organ. It's not a fixed machine that runs the same program every day. It's a living, breathing network that is constantly rewriting its own code based on what we do, what we think, and how we focus. This capacity for change is called neuroplasticity, the ability of the brain to rewire itself throughout life. It's the foundation for all learning, all habit formation, all skill acquisition, and ultimately for success in anything meaningful. What's extraordinary is that this process never truly stops. The same mechanisms that allow a child to learn to walk or speak are still active in adults. They just need the right conditions to be reactivated. Neuroplasticity is driven by two primary forces: focus and repetition, paired with recovery. When we engage in something that requires our attention, truly demands it, specific neural circuits light up. These circuits represent the sensory, motor, and cognitive elements involved in that task. The more we activate them with intensity and precision, the more they strengthen. But here's the key. The brain doesn't just change during practice or learning. The actual rewiring occurs afterward during periods of rest and sleep. This is why it's not enough to simply try harder. You have to pair effort with recovery. The brain rewires most effectively when you oscillate between deep focus and complete disengagement. When you focus, you're essentially marking circuits for change. You're telling your brain, this is important, strengthen this pathway. But the strengthening itself happens later. During sleep, particularly in stages of slow wave and REM sleep, the brain replays neural activity patterns from the day. It's like rehearsing what you just practiced, but at a neural level, without conscious effort. Synapses, the connections between neurons, are selectively reinforced or pruned during this replay. What you practice deliberately and with focus becomes hardwired. What you didn't focus on fades away. This is the biological basis of the phrase, neurons that fire together wire together. The timing of this process matters immensely. Focused attention triggers neuromodulators, dopamine, acetylcholine, and norepinephrine, which act as signals to the brain, marking certain circuits as relevant. Dopamine provides motivation and reinforcement. Acetylcholine pinpoints the exact synapses involved in the task. Norepinephrine increases alertness and signal-to-noise ratio, sharpening focus. When these chemicals are released together, they create what's called a plasticity window, a period where your brain is highly susceptible to change. That's why practice without focus, like mindlessly repeating a skill, rarely works. You must be alert, engaged, slightly challenged, maybe even frustrated. That mild agitation is a sign that plasticity is being triggered. After that window closes, recovery is essential. This means stepping away, letting the nervous system reset, and allowing those molecular changes to stabilize into long-term connections. It's in these off states that the machinery of memory takes over: protein synthesis, gene expression, and synaptic remodeling. Sleep, in particular, is where the heavy lifting happens. Studies show that even short naps following a learning session enhance retention and performance. So if you want to learn faster, you can't just cram more hours of effort. You need to structure effort and rest strategically. A focused 90-minute learning block followed by genuine rest is far more effective than 3 unfocused hours of grinding. There's also a subtlety to how attention and effort interact. Too much stress or overexertion releases cortisol, which can actually impair plasticity. The ideal state for learning is one of high alertness paired with low anxiety. This is why breathing techniques, light exposure, and movement can modulate how well you learn. They tune your autonomic state, the balance between alertness and calm, so that your brain is ready to encode new information. You want to be in that narrow band between boredom and overwhelm, what psychologists call the flow channel. It's in this zone that dopamine and acetylcholine dance together to build lasting change. It's also worth noting that plasticity isn't limited to cognitive tasks. It governs emotional regulation, habits, and even mindset. When you repeatedly practice a way of thinking, gratitude, resilience, problem solving, you're shaping the same kinds of neural circuits as when you learn a physical skill. The brain doesn't distinguish between mental and physical practice at the cellular level. It only detects patterns of activation and repetition. So the habits you cultivate, the focus you bring, and the recovery you allow all sculpt who you become to rewire your brain for success. You must understand this rhythm, effort, focus, rest, repeat. You have to deliberately challenge your circuits, mark them for change through focused attention, and then let the system integrate those changes through rest and sleep. The process isn't instant, but it's remarkably reliable. Within weeks, sometimes even days, the neural patterns that once felt foreign begin to feel natural. You're literally building the hardware for success. Neuroplasticity is not about age, it's about state. If you can cultivate states of deep focus and pair them with adequate recovery, you can change at any point in your life. The brain's capacity to adapt is lifelong, but it needs direction. You are the architect. Your attention is the blueprint, and your sleep is the construction crew. When those elements align, the rewiring happens effortlessly. So if you want to change your mind, your habits, or your life, start with focus, pair it with rest, and let your brain do what it was designed to do, evolve. Dopamine is often misunderstood. Most people think of it as the pleasure chemical, the thing that spikes when we experience something enjoyable, like getting a compliment, eating our favorite food, or receiving good news. But dopamine is not about pleasure itself, it's about pursuit. It's the molecule that drives us to act, to move toward goals, to seek what's next. It's motivation, not satisfaction. It's what pushes us through effort and fuels our desire to grow. Understanding dopamine and learning to manage its timing is one of the most powerful tools for sustaining effort, avoiding burnout, and creating lasting momentum. The brain's dopamine system operates through a delicate balance of peaks and baselines. When you do something rewarding, dopamine levels rise. That's the peak. But afterward, levels don't just return to normal. They often drop below baseline. That dip is what we feel as fatigue, discouragement, or loss of motivation. It's the reason you can feel low or unmotivated right after achieving something exciting. The brain has a built-in balancing system. Every high must be followed by a low. The challenge is not to eliminate the highs or the lows, but to manage them, to work with your biology instead of against it. When people chase constant dopamine peaks through social media, caffeine overload, or excessive stimulation, their baseline gradually drops. This means that ordinary activities stop feeling rewarding. You might notice this when work that once excited you starts feeling dull, or when small wins no longer bring satisfaction. That's dopamine depletion. Not because dopamine is gone, but because the system has become desensitized. The receptors that respond to dopamine have down-regulated. It's like turning up the volume so high that the speakers blow out. To rebuild motivation, you have to allow the system to reset, to let baseline dopamine recover. The most effective way to manage dopamine isn't to suppress it, but to control its timing. You want dopamine release to be associated with effort, not just the outcome. When you learn to enjoy the process itself, the struggle, the focus, the micro-improvements, you create a self-sustaining loop. The brain learns that effort equals reward. This is what allows high performers to keep pushing long after others give up. Their reward system is tied to the act of pursuing the goal, not just achieving it. They don't need constant external validation because the process itself provides the chemical reinforcement. This can be trained. The key is to start linking your internal sense of satisfaction to the act of showing up rather than to external results. When you acknowledge progress during the grind, telling yourself, this challenge is the signal that I'm improving, you're pairing dopamine release with effort. Over time, this changes the neural wiring of motivation. Your brain stops waiting for the reward at the finish line. It starts releasing dopamine as soon as you engage. That's how habit momentum is created. You begin to crave the process itself, not just the reward. Contrast that with people who only experience dopamine when they achieve or when they get external approval. They experience long stretches of low motivation in between bursts of effort. They burn out quickly because their brains learn that reward comes only at the end, and that gap between effort and gratification feels unbearable. By shifting dopamine release into the process, by rewarding effort itself, you collapse that gap. Every repetition, every bit of progress, every moment of deep focus becomes a dopamine event. Managing dopamine also means knowing when to rest. Because every peak lowers baseline temporarily, you have to allow for recovery. Sleep, sunlight, movement, and hydration all play critical roles in resetting dopamine tone. Morning sunlight exposure, for example, helps regulate dopamine and serotonin pathways, stabilizing mood and motivation. Short bouts of physical activity release small, sustainable amounts of dopamine, keeping the system balanced. Even simple acts like deliberate deep breathing or taking breaks outdoors can recalibrate baseline dopamine faster than scrolling through social media, which only deepens the crash. There's also a powerful concept called dopamine layering. It happens when you stack multiple rewarding stimuli on top of each other, like listening to loud music, checking notifications, drinking caffeine, and working simultaneously. It feels amazing in the moment, but devastates the baseline afterward. The brain starts to expect that level of stimulation, making normal work feel empty. To avoid this, separate your sources of dopamine. Let work be work. Let leisure be leisure. When you stop layering, you restore sensitivity. The work itself becomes meaningful again. One of the most effective habits for managing dopamine is periodic discomfort, intentional break from pleasure, fasting from digital stimulation, cold exposure, or even taking a rest day from intense exercise. These all reset the system. They temporarily lower dopamine levels, which paradoxically raises the baseline afterward. The brain becomes more responsive to natural rewards again. It's a way of teaching your nervous system to appreciate simplicity, to find motivation without constant novelty. The ultimate goal is balance. You don't want to live in dopamine peaks, but you also don't want to flatten them completely. You want controlled waves, peaks that come from effort, lows that you allow for recovery, and a steadily rising baseline that supports long-term drive. When you understand dopamine's timing, you stop chasing motivation like a spark. You learn to cultivate it like a steady flame. You don't depend on excitement to move forward. You generate your own momentum by pairing effort with meaning. Dopamine is your brain's way of teaching you what to value. If you teach it that comfort is the reward, you'll seek comfort. But if you teach it that growth, learning, and challenge are rewarding, you'll seek those instead. That's how people rewire their motivation. It's not about having more dopamine, it's about when and how it's released. Master that, and you no longer have to wait for motivation to show up. You become the source of it. Every habit, whether constructive or destructive, follows the same neurological formula: cue, action, reward. It's not just a metaphor, it's a literal circuit inside the brain. The cue triggers neural activity in sensory and memory regions. The action engages motor or cognitive pathways. The reward releases neuromodulators like dopamine that stamp the behavior into the nervous system. When this loop repeats, the connections between cue and action strengthen, and the behavior becomes automatic. It's not willpower that sustains habits, it's circuitry. The brain doesn't care if a habit serves you or sabotages you. It simply reinforces whatever pattern gets repeated with reliable reward. The key to rewiring habits isn't force, it's precision. Most people make the mistake of trying to overhaul everything at once. They aim for massive change, thinking intensity will override inertia. But the brain doesn't work that way. It prefers predictability and small, repeatable wins. Each time you perform a behavior and get a consistent, positive outcome, the neurons involved fire together. Over time, their connections strengthen through long-term potentiation, a process where repeated activation lowers the threshold for firing. In plain terms, it becomes easier to do the thing next time. Small wins compound at the cellular level. The cue action reward loop functions like a rehearsal system. When you encounter the cue, a time of day, a place, a feeling, even a sound, your brain predicts what comes next. It's prediction, not intention, that drives most behavior. If the action that follows leads to a reward, the brain flags that sequence as valuable and prepares to repeat it. The more consistent the sequence, the faster it becomes automatic. This is why building habits around predictable triggers is so effective. When cues are stable and rewards are reliable, the brain learns faster. For example, imagine you want to build a daily exercise habit. If you tell yourself, I'll work out whenever I feel motivated, your brain has no consistent cue. Motivation is unpredictable, so the habit loop never stabilizes. But if you pair the behavior with a specific trigger, like putting on workout clothes right after morning coffee, the cue becomes predictable. Your brain begins to associate that coffee smell that time of day with the next action. Over a few weeks, the transition from cue to action becomes automatic. You're no longer deciding. You're executing a circuit. The reward phase is what seals the loop. But here's where nuance matters. The brain responds most strongly to rewards that are immediate and predictable, not necessarily large. This is why small, consistent reinforcements build habits faster than occasional big ones. Each repetition releases a small pulse of dopamine, signaling that the behavior was successful. Over time, this steady feedback creates momentum. The brain begins to anticipate the reward, releasing dopamine even before the action starts. That's when the habit becomes self-propelling. Large, infrequent rewards, like buying something expensive after a long period of discipline, might feel powerful in the moment, but they don't create strong neural associations. They're too far removed from the daily behavior. The nervous system needs frequent short feedback cycles to learn efficiently. This is why microhabits, tiny consistent actions, can transform behavior so effectively. The repetition teaches the brain what to expect. If you want to replace a bad habit, you can't just remove it, you have to rewire the loop. The cue remains, so the brain still anticipates the action and reward. The trick is to keep the cue, replace the action, and maintain some form of reward. Suppose stress triggers a craving to scroll through your phone. You can't eliminate the stress cue, but you can replace the action with a quick breathing pattern or a short walk. Then give yourself a small reward, a sense of completion, a positive phrase, or a physical gesture like standing taller. It might sound subtle, but these micro rewards create the dopamine signal that reinforces the new pattern. Over time, the old circuit weakens and the new one strengthens. Timing also matters. The brain's plasticity, its ability to change, increases when attention is focused and when the outcome feels significant. This means that during the first moments of performing a new habit, your level of engagement matters more than the duration. A short, deliberate practice session with full attention wires the circuit more deeply than a long, distracted one. The nervous system needs precision, not volume. One of the most overlooked elements in habit formation is self-generated reward. When you internally recognize effort, telling yourself, "This is the process of becoming better," you trigger dopamine intrinsically. You're teaching your brain that effort itself is the reward. That's the secret behind long-term consistency. You no longer depend on external outcomes. The internal chemistry of effort keeps you moving forward. This is how high performers sustain motivation when results are delayed. Over time, repeated cue-action-reward cycles sculpt neural architecture. Circuits that support the desired habit grow stronger, while unused ones fade through a process called synaptic pruning. The brain literally reshapes itself to favor the behaviors you repeat. This is neuroplasticity in action, not abstract theory, but physical change within your nervous system. To engineer lasting habit change, think like a scientist rather than a motivator. Start small, define your cue precisely, make the reward immediate and predictable, and repeat the loop consistently. Don't aim for intensity, aim for reliability, because every repetition is a vote for a new identity, one that becomes embedded in your neural circuitry. Eventually, the process moves from conscious effort to unconscious execution. You no longer force the behavior. The brain runs the program automatically. This is the real path to transformation. Not sudden breakthroughs, but steady rewiring. Small wins, predictable rewards, consistent cues. That's how you turn fleeting intentions into permanent change. The brain doesn't need dramatic effort. It needs clear instructions and reliable repetition. And when you give it that, it will do what it was designed to do: adapt, automate, and evolve. Your brain does not operate in isolation. It's not just an organ that sits in your skull, sending commands to the rest of your body. It's part of an integrated system, a dynamic loop where body and brain constantly exchange information. Every thought, every emotion, every learning experience is shaped by signals coming from the body. Movement, light exposure, and sleep aren't just background factors in mental performance. They're direct levers that determine how well your brain rewires itself. In other words, your physiological state sets the conditions for neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to change itself. Movement is one of the most potent triggers for brain adaptation. When you move, whether walking, running, or simply changing posture, your body sends feedback to the nervous system through sensory neurons. This feedback activates circuits in the spinal cord, cerebellum, and motor cortex, but it also influences neuromodulators like dopamine, norepinephrine, and serotonin. These chemicals don't just affect mood, they gate plasticity. They decide whether the brain is in a state of readiness to change or not. Movement raises alertness and creates what might be called an optimal learning window, a period where the brain is primed to absorb and reorganize information. Exercise also increases the release of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF, often described as fertilizer for neurons. BDNF supports the growth of new synapses and strengthens existing ones. It enhances the ability of neurons to form lasting connections, which is the cellular foundation of learning. Even small bouts of physical activity, a brisk 10-minute walk, a few minutes of jumping rope, or light stretching, can increase BDNF levels and sharpen focus. It's not about exhausting the body. It's about activating it enough to wake up the neurochemical systems that support cognitive flexibility. Movement is also a way of aligning the body with effort. When you pair learning with physical engagement, for instance, pacing while memorizing or using gestures while explaining a concept, you're linking motor activity with cognitive circuits. This crosstalk strengthens neural representations because the brain encodes experiences that engage multiple systems simultaneously. You're teaching it to associate effort and movement with focus and learning. That's why some of the most effective thinkers and performers use motion as a tool for clarity. Then there's light, the most powerful external signal that sets the rhythm of the brain and body. Light is not just for vision, it's information. When morning sunlight hits the eyes, specialized cells in the retina send signals to a region of the brain called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, the master clock of the circadian system. This starts a cascade that regulates cortisol, dopamine, and melatonin release across the next 24 hours. Early day light exposure increases alertness and synchronizes the timing of all bodily systems, hormone cycles, temperature rhythms, digestion, and even immune function. In doing so, it stabilizes the internal environment the brain depends on for plasticity. When you miss morning light or spend most of your day under dim indoor lighting, your circadian system drifts, cortisol peaks at the wrong time, dopamine rhythms flatten, and melatonin secretion at night becomes erratic. The result is poor focus during the day and shallow, fragmented sleep at night. A recipe for diminished learning and emotional stability. Getting 10 to 15 minutes of natural sunlight within the first hour of waking anchors the entire system. It's one of the simplest yet most powerful tools to enhance brain performance. Sleep, perhaps more than anything else, determines how effectively the brain rewires. During waking hours, you create experiences that open plasticity windows. During sleep, those experiences are replayed, refined, and stored. Specific stages, slow wave and REM, serve different functions. Slow wave sleep consolidates factual and procedural memory by replaying neural activity patterns at high speed, strengthening relevant connections. REM sleep integrates emotions and cognitive insights, allowing you to link new information with older memories. Without sufficient sleep, these processes are disrupted. You may still perform tasks, but the neural changes that make learning permanent fail to occur. Sleep also restores chemical balance in the brain. Dopamine, serotonin, and adenosine all reset during the night, setting the tone for motivation and alertness the next day. Missing even one night of quality sleep reduces the brain's capacity for plasticity by blunting the sensitivity of neurons to new input. It's not an overstatement to say that sleep is the final step in every learning protocol. You can't expect lasting change without it. The connection among movement, light, and sleep is cyclical. Light exposure influences when you move and when you sleep. Movement enhances sleep depth and hormone balance. Sleep, in turn, determines your energy for movement and your responsiveness to light cues. Together, they create a biological scaffold that the brain uses to determine when to learn, when to rest, and when to rewire. It's easy to overlook these as background wellness habits, but they are far more fundamental than that. They are the conditions that govern whether the brain can adapt at all. Without proper light exposure, movement, and rest, even the most disciplined effort to focus or learn feels harder than it should. The circuits simply aren't primed. But when you align your body with these natural rhythms, you make plasticity easier. You shift from fighting your biology to working with it. So, before you worry about advanced learning strategies or productivity hacks, start with the basics, move often, step into the morning light, and protect your sleep like a skill. These are not just lifestyle tips. They're biological instructions. When the body is aligned with its natural rhythms, the brain doesn't need to be forced to change. It does so automatically. The body sets the stage and the brain performs the transformation. Rewiring your brain for success is not mystical. It's a set of levers: attention, timing of reward, incremental challenge, and consolidation that you can manipulate deliberately. Do these consistently and the brain will respond, reconfiguring circuits so that the behaviors you want become easier, more automatic, and more resilient. You don't need willpower as a fixed trait. You need systems that create the right brain states at the right times. If you want a simple take-home, practice with intention, reward with predictability, challenge incrementally, and protect your sleep. Repeat daily. Clinically simple, scientifically robust, practically powerful. Thank you for listening. If this delivered value, hit like so more people get these practical neuroscience tools, and subscribe to Brain Encoded for weekly breakdowns that turn cutting-edge science into usable routines. Start today, pick one 45-minute session, use the 5-step protocol, and tell me how it goes in the comments. I'll read them and respond. You came here to change your brain. Now give it the right instructions, and it will change you.